My name is Justin, and I build my own speakers. In this video, we're going to unbox the Banks 18-gauge brad nailer and compare it to the Central Pneumatic combination brad nailer and stapler. If you're going to build speakers, you really need a brad nailer. Typical speaker construction uses wood glue to hold butt joints together. What I like to do is use my clamps to position the workpieces and brad nails to hold them together while the glue sets. It's faster and cheaper than using screws, and the glue is what holds it all together. We tend to cover the speaker with veneer, carpet, or paint, so there's no need to worry about seeing nails in the finished product. I've been using the Central Pneumatic for quite some time and it works great, but as you will see later, the nailer-stapler combo leaves a big divot in the workpiece. And as I've been branching out into projects that need to look a bit nicer, it was time to try something different. I picked up the Banks on sale for $22. The normal price is $30. The Central Pneumatic combination nailer stapler can also be had on sale for around $15. So why don't we open up the box and see what it's all about. Inside the cardboard box is a hard plastic carrying case, which is not useful for me since I work out of a garage. I don't carry these kinds of things out to job sites very often. I also see an owner's manual. I like that the case has a slot for the owner's manual. I rarely need the manual, but when I do, I've usually lost it, so it's nice to have a place to keep the manual. The manual is straightforward. It's a brad nailer. These things are not hard to use. It's important to read the safety warnings, but common sense is also important. Don't press the brad nailer against any body parts and pull the trigger, or anyone else's body parts and pull the trigger. Keep it oiled. You're going to want to oil it every day you use it. Be careful if your hands are near the spot where you're nailing, holding your workpieces together. Occasionally a brad nail will curve when you fire it off, and sometimes put a brad into your finger. This is why I like to use clamps to hold things together before I pop in a few brad nails. Attached to the device are 3 tips to prevent jams, all of which are common sense. Use the correct size nail. This thing is for 5/8 to 2 inch 18-gauge brad nails. If you use the wrong size nail, it's going to cause pain and suffering. Don't mix nails of different sizes, so don't put some 2-inch nails in there and then load some 5/8 inch nails in there as well. It's going to jam up if you do that. And of course, you want to try to keep your tools clean always. Don't take this tag literally. You don't have to go out to the garage every single morning and drop some oil into these things. Just oil it when you use it. It is important to keep these things oiled. If you ever see sparks when you're shooting a brad, or if the brads start to drive crooked and curve in the workpiece, you're going to want to go ahead and drop some oil in it. That's a surefire sign that it needs oil. So let's now compare these two things side by side, and as you can see, they're almost identical in size and construction. If it were not for the colors, you probably couldn't tell them apart. Let's take a closer look at these things. There's a spring-loaded clip so that you can access the nails to add and take nails out on the Central Pneumatic. The Banks is exactly the same. The spring doesn't pop as much. That's because it's not loaded with nails. Both of them have the same release on the front for clearing out jams. My experience is that the Central Pneumatic only seems to jam whenever I've not oiled it properly. A little bit of oil seems to fix that. On the side here, the Banks tells us how much pressure we need to use. The Banks seems to jam a little bit more than the Central Pneumatic. It's a little bit less reliable in my experience, but I've also found that if I keep it oiled, it does just fine. Both of them operate in the exact same manner. You push the head of the device onto the workpiece and pull the trigger. The Central Pneumatic is a little bit greasy because I've been using a lot and keeping it oiled. Take a look on the end. There's a little cap on the Central Pneumatic that covers up the terminal, the quick disconnect terminal. The Banks do not come with one of those. And one thing that I found kind of interesting, and it's really kind of hard to catch on camera, and I took some measuring devices here to see if I could kind of show it, but the quick release tip on that Banks is a little bit crooked. I don't know if it's angled on purpose so that it's easier to attach and use a hose, or if it's just a manufacturing error. So who knows if that's a quirk or a feature, but it's perfectly straight on the Central Pneumatic and a little bit crooked on the Banks. Here I've got an Allen key, and I'm trying to kind of show that it's crooked, which it's just not showing up that well on camera, but trust me, it's a little bit crooked there. I'm not honestly sure what to make of that. Both units seem to weigh about the same. The Central Pneumatic feels a little bit heavier, and I'm not sure why that is, as they both appear to be made out of the same ratio of plastic to metal. Perhaps there's just a little bit more plastic in the banks now that I get to looking at it closer. Both of them have a dial on the end that lets you direct the blast. Right there I am on screen showing that. That's really handy. I didn't realize that was there until I got the banks. You just turn that so that the blast doesn't hit your face, and what I find happens is I'm often repositioning myself at different angles, and sometimes the blast hits me and sometimes it doesn't. So let's oil this thing up real quick. And one thing that I think is interesting is that this inexpensive Central Pneumatic came with that little bottle of oil, so you can quickly and easily drop some oil into the quick disconnect, and the banks did not. Now when I went looking at the banks to see what I could find, I did find it had some more Allen keys. Like I need more Allen keys. It seems like I've always got piles and piles of Allen keys laying around my shop. All right, let's get to the real part of the story. Let's drive some brad nails. First of all, the Central Pneumatic. I'm going to drive a couple of brad nails in, and as you can see, I said earlier I like to use clamps to hold things together because it's just easier. Sometimes you need an extra hand. So we'll pop a couple of brads into this guy, and then we're going to get in real close, and I'm going to show you the only critique I have of this $15 combination nailer stapler. And that critique is that it is a combination nailer stapler. And you can see it from this angle quite well. When this thing drives a brad nail in, it makes a divot that's the size of a 1/4 inch staple. It's a 1/4 inch stapler, 18 gauge brad nailer combination. And so let's see if we can kind of get in close and get a good look. It's kind of hard sometimes to get a good look at this. So let's see if we can maybe perhaps pause it and take a look at the big divots that this thing leaves. If you're going to paint this, cover it up with vinyl or something like that, that divot's not going to make any difference. But sometimes you're just going to stain your woodworking piece, and a lot of times people will do woodworking where they drive a brad nail in and they finish it with stain. And that's perfectly fine, but that combination nailer stapler isn't going to work for that. So if you want to hold things together with glue and brad nails, the brad nailer is the way to go. And you can see this thing does just a fine job. The divots are the size of the brad nail, easy to cover up, easy to ignore in a workpiece, whereas the big holes the stapler leaves are less desirable. Just for kicks and giggles, here's some slow motion footage of the Banks brad nailer in action. This is slowed down to 25% of the original speed of the video. And while you're watching that, let's just go ahead and summarize. These two things are basically identical. The $15 Central Pneumatic brad nailer and stapler, and the $22 Banks 18 gauge brad nailer. These of course are the prices that you can expect to pay if you catch them on sale, and they're on sale all the time because that's just how Harbor Freight does their business model. Which one should you get? Well, it's real simple. If you need a pneumatic stapler and you're not too worried about the size of the divot that's left behind, go ahead and grab the Central Pneumatic. It works just fine. It is reliable. It gets the job done. There's no reason why every DIY or every homeowner shouldn't have this. It's only $15. As far as the Banks goes, if you don't need a pneumatic stapler, then you should get the Banks. It's going to look a little bit better as far as the finished product goes because you're only driving in this hole for the 18 gauge brad nail. And I personally would choose to go with the Banks for that reason. I had good reasons for buying both of them when I bought them, and they're both perfectly fine. But here's the kind of the important part. Don't go out and spend $60 on a brad nailer. Don't go out and spend $100 on a brad nailer, because this $22 Banks brad nailer is more than adequate. It will do the job every single time. Just keep them oiled and be safe when using the tool. No point at all in going over to the big box stores to get a brad nailer. If you think you need to spend more money on a brad nailer, you can always upgrade to the Pierce brad nailers. If you want to spend $60 on one, I'm sure they've got one for $60. And these are perfectly fine tools, and there's no real reason not to buy one of them.